Hey podcast community, it's Eric, and I've got something exciting for all you online entrepreneurs out there. If you're looking to take your e-commerce store to the next level, you need to check out Aurora Repricer. With Aura, you can effortlessly reprice your Amazon inventory automatically. Ready to elevate your Amazon business? Head over to MilwaukeeMafia.com/Aura. That's AURA to get started today.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your weekly podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric Walterkins.
I'm Gavin Schmidt.
And Gavin, take her away.
All right, so just a heads up, Eric, you should already know this, but if you don't, this is our last regular episode of the season.
Okay.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay.
This had been discussed.
Yes.
But this is going to happen.
Yes. So the next 4 episodes, they're going to be short.
Okay.
They're going to be 15 minutes tops, taking a little break for about a month, and then we'll be back with these nice long ones that you like editing so much. But for today, we've got part 2 of our story from last week. Do you remember our story from last week?
It was the Frank Aiello.
Okay, you do. Very good. So we're calling this Death in the Family 2, part 2. This is the story of Angelo LaMantia. So just to get everybody caught up, Frank Aiello is playing cards. He's shot through the window while he's playing cards. He's dead. Nobody really knows why he was targeted. Everybody says he was a good guy. He wasn't a bootlegger or anybody.
But he did deliver bootlegged beer.
Sometimes he did.
Alcohol, I should say.
Sometimes he did. And everybody sort of pointed the finger at his brother-in-law, Angelo LaMantia, who they didn't get along for a variety of reasons. Basically internal family stuff. Not really mob stuff, but whatever. We're now at the point, okay, Frank Aiello's dead. Angelo LaMantia cannot be found. It turns out, even though he was not in Milwaukee, LaMantia had actually not gone very far. He went 30 miles south.
Wow.
To the city of Racine. And he actually had a very good-sized bootlegging operation going on in Racine with his buddy John Messina, who I think is mentioned in the first half, but if not, John Messina is the guy sort of running things for him in Racine. He's working out of a garage on Elbert Street, and I don't really know where Elbert Street is, but if anyone's in Racine, they probably know. They're working out of here. So LaMantia, Messina, and another man named Mike Oliveri, who also used to be a member of the Joe Aiello gang. But again, no relation between Joe Aiello and Frank Aiello, despite the fact they're both part of this story. And so Mike Oliveri was another member of this same gang that LaMantia was part of in Chicago, and he had been active in bombing various places in Chicago. And bombing places with him was a man who later on becomes the head of a Teamsters union in Milwaukee, so eventually we'll get back to him, but that's all beside the point here. I'm off on a tangent. Well, anyway, so they're in their hideout on Elbert Street, and they're remodeling it because they want to turn this not into just a place where you come and you pick up your beer, but you can actually have a nice dinner too. So they're remodeling it into a restaurant, and they have yet another partner there, a man named Dominic Zizzo, who is kind of doing the remodeling for them. Well, it's August 22nd, 1931. It's 11 o'clock at night, roughly the same time that Frank Aiello was shot. What do you suppose happens?
I'm thinking he gets shot.
Who?
The terrible with names, the brother-in-law.
No,
somebody else.
Somebody else. Gunfire comes in through the front window of the Elbert Street residence, restaurant, whatever it might be. It kills John Messina instantly. The assailants had used shotguns, pistols, and a machine gun on the home. Police also found 3 sticks of dynamite with a 10-inch fuse that were wrapped in copies of the newspaper, but the dynamite did not go off. So, on top of pistol, shotguns, and a machine gun, they were going to blow the place up, too. Really, somebody had a problem with them.
So they only killed, what did you say his name was? John Messina?
John Messina.
Yeah, but based on the firepower they had, they intended on killing just about everybody within the vicinity of the property.
Yeah, probably.
So he might have just been a casualty of this and not even the intended target, or the main intended target, possibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so none of the neighbors claimed that they saw or heard anything, as usual. And his landlord, the person who actually owned the property, was telling police, well, I don't know any enemies that he had. So, the same old story. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Everybody liked him. An informant later said that the killer was probably a man named Black Joe from Kansas City. He did not further identify this Black Joe, and I do not know who that would be. So if somebody knows more about 1930s Kansas City mobsters named Black Joe, let me know, because I have no idea.
And did this informant have any sort of evidence to suggest that this was a viable possibility, or was he just saying, "Oh yeah, it was Black Joe that did it"?
Who knows?
They don't have any record of that, basically.
Well, they didn't know who Black Joe was, so how reliable that information is, who knows? They didn't end up catching this guy.
Okay.
Well, Angelo LaMantia, he's already left Milwaukee, and now his Racine place is blown up, so he flees again. This time he goes to Youngstown, Ohio. He's joined there by John Romano, who is either his brother-in-law or his cousin or both. It's kind of hard to tell. His sister is married to a man named Joe Romano, so it might be his brother-in-law. But his mother's maiden name is Romano, so he has cousins named Romano. And it's possible that his sister married her cousin. I don't know. But anyway, so this guy, so they're in Ohio. But anyway, the next day, Racine police, they found evidence that one of Messina's companions was injured. A blood-stained coat with a bullet hole in the back was found in a nearby yard. A loaded revolver was found in another yard. The district attorney speculated that Messina had hooked up with the recently broken booze ring in Rockford that had caused many of Rockford's early mob figures to serve time in Leavenworth prison. Men such as Tony Musso, Peter Sanfilippo, Paul Giovingo, and so on. None of these names really matter. But a whole bunch of guys. Altogether, 40 men were caught bootlegging in Rockford and got caught. There were two separate gangs in Rockford. One was backed by Tony Musso, and the other was backed by Paul Giovingo, and Musso's side eventually won. We may eventually talk about Tony Musso more, because before he was in Rockford, he was a mob boss in Madison, but he ended up leaving Madison after he assaulted a young woman. So if we ever talk about Madison, we'll probably talk about Tony Musso. But
You kind of lost me with the Rockford connection. So
yeah.
Is the Racine police saying that this gang was broken up in Rockford, and then some of the people came down to Racine, and this guy caught up with this, what is it, John Messina?
Yeah. Okay.
Started working with them to become in a Racine production, I guess.
Yes.
Type thing.
That may have been confusing. So thank you for asking. Yeah, so they're looking into evidence. They're trying to figure out who killed John Messina, and they've now found another, a bloody coat with a bullet hole. Not John Messina's coat, just another person's bloody coat. And this is the speculation that somehow Racine is tied into this Rockford gang. Whether this is true or not, I have no idea. But this is the speculation. So they kind of look into that angle for a while. About a week after the Messina murder, bootlegger Alan Robinson goes to the police. He said he had been on the spot for the last few days. On the spot means he was targeted by other guys. He was on the spot for the last few days and been ordered to leave town or else. Acting on Robinson's tip, the police and prohibition agents raided 4 stills that held a combined capacity of 1,000 gallons and was valued at $20,000. 2 men were arrested who just happened to stop in while it was being raided. Nobody else was there. Robinson also directed police to a depot in North Racine where alcohol was mixed and shipped out of a garage. He claimed to have run alcohol as far as Iowa and said that Capone's men were trying to dominate Racine. Whether this is true or not, I do not know. There were later reports that Robinson was not actually a bootlegger, but he was an undercover prohibition agent who was pretending to be a bootlegger to get information around town. I also don't know if this is true. A lot of speculation.
Now, like an undercover prohibition agent, would that have been something more on the federal level?
That's definitely on the federal level.
Okay,
yeah.
Because at this point, right, I think we discussed this in the last episode, that Milwaukee cops just don't care.
Milwaukee cops don't care. Racine cops, I don't know, but probably similar. And this is 1931. We're getting down towards the end of Prohibition, and they don't know. They don't know that it's the end of Prohibition. But it's been going on for 10 years at this point, and most of the police are just sick of it. That evening, somebody calls the police and says, "Meet us down at Elbert Street in half an hour, and we'll shoot it out." So 20 officers and a prohibition agent jump into 10 automobiles and drive to the location. Police spent an hour searching yards and alleys, but could not find the anonymous caller. One agent insisted that the call had not been a prank because it had come from a significant phone number. It did not say who. A couple people were arrested and questioned, but let go. Only one man was actually given any ticket at all, and I include this in here because it's funny, not because it's important. Earl Sass, who is only 16, he was taken down to police headquarters for hurling tomatoes at the officers while they were raiding these places. So the only person out of this to get in any trouble is some teenager yelling at the police, throwing tomatoes. So John Messina's death brought prohibition agents to Racine like flies on you-know-what. The agents had found out that a local sheet metal company was manufacturing stills and selling them off to the bootleggers, which borderline illegal. I mean, there's no alcohol involved, but you kind of know when someone's buying a still.
What they're doing with them.
Yeah, so they were able to do that, shut them down. And after this, they said, we've delivered the death blow. There's not going to be any more bootlegging in town. You guys can't have your stills anymore. They did also find a man with a 500-gallon still named Steve Arato, or Arato, I'm not sure. I'm probably saying that terribly wrong, who was in Racine but was actually from Milwaukee. And the only reason I bring up Steve, because he's not really majorly important, but he's got a grandson by the same name who I can't really talk about because he's still alive. But even more notorious than this guy, because he was involved in, I shouldn't even say involved with, but he was connected to 2 different homicides in Neenah, Wisconsin.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that could come up on Fox City's murder.
It
it really couldn't because he's still alive.
Right. That's why I'm being really vague about this. Like it's totally true. I mean, it's front page news. Like I'm not telling anything that people don't know, but he may not appreciate that. Okay, now 100 prohibition agents, I don't know how they found 100, but 100 prohibition agents swarm into Racine and simultaneously raid 37 establishments, arresting 52 men. They find several truckloads of beer, gin, wine, and whiskey. They arrest a former alderman. They also arrest a man whose wife was found tending bar with her 6 children, getting the kids in the family business there.
This question has very little to do with this story, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea, like, based on the way you're describing these raids, they sound pretty huge?
Yes.
Like, was this a massive takedown of prohibition at this point, or is this something that was happening every day, where they would go in and arrest 52 people for...
My impression is that this is huge.
This was a significant
This
thing.
is huge. Like, what's happening in these couple months here in Racine, I'm not aware of anything similar happening in Milwaukee or Madison. I couldn't speak to Chicago or New York. I have no idea. But at least, like, in my limited, what I'm aware of, 100 agents raiding a city, that's just not normal.
Not normal at all.
No, so this is massive, the way they're cracking down on this all of a sudden. Things seem to have quieted down, but then 3 men fired a double-barreled shotgun at an unknown man in a coupe parked in front of the Avalon Cafe on Elbert Street. Again, Elbert Street. Just before 10 p.m., this is a few months later. Police said it was a sequel to the John Messina slaying. The victim ran inside the Avalon Cafe for a moment, and a bartender observed blood pouring down the right side of the man's head. He had seen the man before, but he didn't know his name. A check at local hospitals by police revealed no recent patients with head wounds. The double-barreled shotgun was found in the snow by detectives. 2 discharged cartridges were found nearby. The injured man was believed to be Dominic Zizzo, one of the partners of LaMantia and Messina. He was one of the few remaining Italian bootleggers of any prominence. His car was found with broken windows and blood inside, which is why the police thought that he was the one who was shot. Zizzo also happened to own the home that Messina was in at the time of the murder, as you may recall, making the connection stronger. However, when police questioned Zizzo, he said he had been home all night, and friends often borrowed his car. I don't know who was borrowing my car. I don't know who got shot and was bleeding all over and broke my windshield. Could have been anybody.
Honestly, though, that at that point in time, that probably wasn't that uncommon of a thing for people to be sharing cars left and right, because I bet you just at this point in time, not that many people had vehicles.
And that's true. You're absolutely right. I would still hope you'd know who was driving your car.
Yeah, very true, but...
But yes, you're right. You're definitely right. We're running low on guys here. The bootlegging's kind of drying up. You might remember Pete LaMantia, who was possibly Angelo LaMantia's brother. He was another guy kind of loosely connected to this group. Well, he was wanted in Sicily for a murder, but he never ended up facing the courts there. He escaped from federal custody and moved to California. Before long, he was allegedly killed by rival gangsters and his body was dumped. We don't know for sure. I can find no record of his death, so exactly what happened to him, I do not know. Angelo LaMantia, our main character this week, finally returns to Milwaukee after hiding out in New Jersey on January 26, 1940, to face charges for the murder of his brother-in-law.
Which would be Frank.
Frank Aiello.
Okay.
Thank you. They did not end up serving the murder charges on him, however. He had been gone for almost 9 years, and police decided there's just no way we're going to win this in court after 9 years. It's not going to work. So they didn't even bother charging him. They instead said, we'd like to question you about it just to see what you know, and he agreed to that. So he sat down for a chat with the police. He said that he had been born in the same village in Sicily as John Messina, so they had known each other their entire lives. They came to America in 1922. He first lived in Brooklyn. He then came to Chicago. This is where he met his wife and her father and ended up moving to Milwaukee with them in about 1928 or 29. LaMantia said he did not remember the date or the year that he was married. He didn't remember who the witnesses were at his wedding, but he recalled moving on after his wedding to Youngstown, Ohio. He was pretty sure he got married in Waukegan by the Justice of the Peace. After that, they stayed in a hotel in Racine for one day before they went to Ohio. Well, in Ohio, he said he operated a fruit stand with some friends of his. He could not recall the street that he lived on in Ohio, but knew that it was the house he lived in had 6 rooms. After 6 months there, his wife, Josephine, Frank Aiello's sister, she becomes pregnant, so they return to Milwaukee so she could be closer to her family. LaMantia did not recall his son's birthday. He thought that it was probably in 1930. It might have been February 12th, and he knew that his son's name was John.
Wow.
Which, for the record, his son's name is John, or was John, he's passed now, was John, and he was born February 12th, so he did guess correctly.
Kind of makes you wonder, what was going on in the dude's head that he couldn't remember any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, can't remember the road you lived on? That's bizarre.
LaMantia said that when he returned to Milwaukee, he tried to operate a flour business. Flour like baking bread, not like flowers. But he was losing money, so he closed the shop after 2 months. He then went into a business selling soda and cigarettes with Frank Aiello, which we might remember from last time. He recalled there being a waitress there, but he did not know her name. He said he left Milwaukee because he was, quote, so disgusted with the city of Milwaukee. And he left in a car owned by his cousin or brother-in-law, Joe Romano. He drove to St. Paul, stayed for a short time, and then went to Philadelphia. While in Philadelphia, he lived on Allegheny Street. He knew where he was this time. He lived there 2 years and then moved to another apartment. And he remembered that his landlord's name was Shapiro. So he's remembering pieces here. While in Philadelphia, he used the alias of Joe Rizzo allegedly because he had a record for bootlegging in Chicago and he did not want people to know this. Rizzo was the name of a boy that he went to school with. He next moved to Broad Street in the back of a tailor shop owned by a man named Rocky. He stayed there for 2 years before moving again, this time with a landlord who was a German mechanic. Finally, he moved into a rooming house owned by an older woman. While there, he would work as a presser for a frock service for 7 years, where he would iron garments and stuff. He had briefly worked in New Jersey, but the work dried up. So all this running around, jumping jobs, cities, all this stuff. Some of it he remembers, some of it he doesn't. He's always on the move. The police showed LaMantia the sawed-off shotgun that had killed Frank Aiello and told him that the weapon came from the home of his father-in-law, Isidore Aiello. LaMantia denied sawing the gun, he denied killing Frank Aiello, and he denied killing anybody. He was shown 2 shotgun shells, but he denied filling them. They also presented evidence to him that he had purchased a marriage license in Waukegan, but had never actually had the marriage performed. LaMantia said, well, as far as I know, I'm married. When asked about Pete LaMantia, he said the rumors of his murder were false. Pete had actually died in Buenos Aires about a year after he escaped from the authorities. So his story now is that his brother or cousin or whatever he is actually went to Argentina, of all places.
Which actually does make sense, because Argentina is a very Italian place.
Yes.
Yes.
So the Milwaukee authorities declined to prosecute LaMantia, even after this interrogation. He runs down his whole life story. They're like, okay, even though you were very good at talking to us, like, you didn't admit to the murder, and we just can't do it after 9 years. We don't have any real evidence or witnesses or anything. So they declined to prosecute him. But his arrest did capture the attention of police in Pittsburgh. He had been identified by eyewitnesses as one of 2 men who murdered Russian sugar dealer Morris Curran in front of his home on June 24th, 1931. This is shortly after the Aiello murder. He then whoever the killer was, threw the smoking gun in the dead man's face. The other gunman was identified by eyewitnesses as Pete LaMantia. So Angelo was booked for murder, sent to Pittsburgh, and sat in jail awaiting trial there. For more on the sugar dealer who was killed, I recommend the book Prohibition Pittsburgh from History Press. I recommend it partially because they're one of my publishers, and that's cool. But also, someone did a really good job of running through who this guy is, why he would have been a target, and who he was supplying in different gangs and in Pittsburgh, which is way outside the scope of this podcast. So I'm not going to even get into that. But if you're interested in organized crime in Pittsburgh, hey, there you go. Prohibition Pittsburgh. A prison term for LaMantia was not in the cards. On May 13th, his defense attorney asked the judge to drop all charges after the 4 original eyewitnesses, who were schoolgirls at the time, could no longer recognize the alleged killer. Which, again, this is 9 years later, so not super surprising. The judge agreed, and LaMantia was released. He was cleared of all charges in Pittsburgh and Milwaukee and anywhere else he might have been wanted. And Angelo LaMantia never returned to Milwaukee. Clara was Frank Aiello's wife.
Mm-hmm.
Her family continues to live in the very same house that he was killed in, at least up through 1977. So I don't know. I don't know if they did after that, but I know for a fact they at least did for another 45 years. The family still lived in that same house. Angelo LaMantia and his wife moved to Arlington Heights, Illinois. They raised a family. They had 2 sons, John previously mentioned, and Isidore. They both became real estate men. The funeral for Josephine was held in 1965 in Arlington Heights, and there were many notable mobsters there from Milwaukee. After his wife died, LaMantia moved to Brazil in 1977, where he lived until 1985 and died. Later informants would point the finger actually at LaMantia's business partner, Jack Inea, for murdering Frank Aiello, not LaMantia. They claimed that Frank's brother, Vito Aiello, would later kill Jack Inea in revenge. And of course, we'll later get to the murder of Jack Inea. So it may not even have been LaMantia at all, as it turns out, but his buddy,
this Jackie.
Jackie Nea, yeah.
Yeah, and he was the guy that was running everything down in Racine.
No,
No,
we got so many names.
Yeah,
no,
sorry.
that's John Messina.
Yeah, but there was a third guy down in Racine too, wasn't there?
Sure. Well, Jackie Nea didn't come up this week at all.
Okay.
He came up a little bit last week because he's buddies with LaMantia and Frank Aiello, who ran the soda parlor or saloon or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And he, both he and Aiello have connections to Madison, and Inea's got connections to guys in Minneapolis, and his father-in-law was a Black Hand letter writer in Ohio. I mean, so these guys are all connected to everybody. It's a whole mess. And we'll definitely go into more detail on Jackie Nea. Not too much longer, probably.
Does Jackie Nea have any motivation to kill Frank?
The informant says that he did it because LaMantia asked him to. He had no personal reason to do it. So
LaMantia killed him.
Well,
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, it's one thing like when the mob boss tells you to kill something, but like when your business partner tells you to kill someone, like it's a bold move.
So, and kind of based on what you talked about in this story, this LaMantia, when he, his gaps in memory of where he was living and stuff like that, I assume that's just because he's trying to cover for somebody. Like when he doesn't remember anything about Ohio. Well, that's because he was down there making alcohol with some guy living in the house where they were making alcohol, and that guy was probably still making alcohol and wanted to cover for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that would be speculation on my part.
It would be complete speculation.
But yes, I tend to agree with what you're saying. I don't doubt that some of it he doesn't remember because, I mean, he's on the move constantly and he probably doesn't really care. But yeah, he clearly, he's leaving parts out. He's saying it, he's telling the police enough that he's talking to the policeman like, yeah, I was here, and here. But he's not really telling them anything. Like, none of that is useful.
Yeah, and the fact that in Pittsburgh he may have killed this sugar producer or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean...
Which didn't even come up in his story at all.
Right, and that directly connects him to having some sort of alcohol connection in Pennsylvania, because if he killed a sugar producer, we don't know that he did, but let's just say he did.
Right.
He was obviously making alcohol in Philadelphia as well.
Right.
So...
Yeah.
I mean,
he was definitely connected to some gang there.
Yeah.
If he's, he's not just going to randomly kill the guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it would just be way too ironic to just randomly kill a sugar producer.
Right. No. And so I kind of skimmed over. I did, because it's, like I said, it's so beyond the point, but like the guy is shot, the Prohibition Pittsburgh guy, he's shot. And then not long after him, like his primary rival, this, I left this out and I shouldn't because this is pretty nasty. His rival not long after is tortured and murdered in his own basement while his 6-year-old daughter is upstairs.
Awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
his wife is at church at the time.
So somebody's taking down the sugar industry in Philly for some reason. It's kind of weird that they would kill both of them off, don't they?
But it's like, I don't think it was the same killer. I think it was revenge for killing the one guy.
It's like one gang killed one person's sugar producer, and then the other gang.
Yeah, you killed our sugar supplier, so we're going to kill yours.
Sugar supplier.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, we got a good book tip too. So, what was that book again? So everybody.
That's Prohibition Pittsburgh from available from History Press, and yeah, I mean it's not a huge book. It's like 150 pages, so it's solid. It'll give you what you want to know, but it won't take you all year to read. And
it's probably the only book written on the subject, I'm guessing, or pretty close.
I'm not an expert on Pittsburgh, but it's definitely probably one of the few.
Yeah. So the good little tidbit there.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we're pretty much wrapped up. I feel bad for Frank Aiello. He never got his justice.
No, he did not.
And we still don't really even know why he was killed.
No, I mean, if the informant is correct, I mean, it really just did come down to personal differences, which is a really stupid reason
Yeah. I mean, just don't talk to the guy.
Yeah.
So, all right. And do you kind of want to give an idea of what these upcoming 4 episodes on our little break are going to be covering?
Yeah. So the next 4 are their mailbag.
Their mailbag?
Yeah.
What, did we suddenly get this onslaught of emails?
Well, we got a couple. We got a couple. So yeah. So I'm gonna take some questions that we got and give some answers. And they're not like huge questions. They're not going to require an hour. So I should be able to answer them in 10 minutes or something. So they're not much, but just something to keep listeners listening while I take a little break.
Yeah, and once again, we thank everybody for tuning in. I'm shocked that we're already through 1 season of this show.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's kind of arbitrary how long a season is. But yeah.
I mean, we just kind of made it up, but but still, it's still 26 episodes, right?
26, 27, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so all right. You want to go ahead and hit them with some contact info?
Absolutely. If you do have a question for the mailbag, go to MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. You can go to the website, MilwaukeeMafia.com, and you'll find all the writing and information that I have that isn't in books. If it's in books, you got to get the book. But otherwise, I put it on the website. And, there's something else, too. What's the other one?
Facebook?
Oh, yeah, Facebook. The people love contacting me on Facebook. Yes. If you go to Facebook.com/Milwaukee Mafia, you'll also find me on Facebook.
Or just Google Milwaukee Mafia.
Google Milwaukee Mafia. I mean, not all 10 top results are me, but like 6 of them are. So it's a pretty good way to do it.
See, little do you know, Gavin is an SEO wizard. And he learned how to game Google completely.
Yeah, I'm beaten by Wikipedia, but I'm okay with that.
Well, and Wikipedia probably references everything you wrote anyway, so. All right, so, and as usual, if you like what you hear from us, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and we will be back with 4 short episodes coming up over the next 4 weeks, and then we'll be back in full swing next month. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next week for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.